This lecture and the next one are the most important lectures for the foundational material. You should think of them as a single unit. This is a slightly dangerous stage in the course because the level of abstraction is going to go up by a notch, especially in the next lecture. We will do examples as usual to keep our feet on the ground, but still the new formalism itself is going to be essential bedrock for the rest of the course. And this formalism will contain ideals, quotients, and isomorphism and correspondence theorems. It's not enough just to know what these terms mean, but you will need to apply them again and again. If you're not able to do that, then you can get lost very quickly, sort of like trying to read a book in a foreign language. So please put in strong effort here. I have listed the main material for today's class. To get to that, let's begin with a brief review. So we have talked about rings, where you can add, subtract and multiply, and special types of rings. So in fields, you can also divide by non-zero elements. And more generally, in integral domains, you may not be able to divide, but you can cancel any non-zero element as long as it is a common factor on both sides of an equality. We then saw polynomial rings and the very general substitution principle. For polynomials in a single variable, you have division with remainder by any monic polynomial, and as a result you get the factor theorem. We also noted the special case where the coefficients come from a field, because here you can do long division by any non-zero polynomial. In last class, I asked you to look for enlargements of polynomial rings, and I will put some of this in the homework. Finally, let's recall the very important notion of ring homomorphisms. This is a map that preserves addition, multiplication, and sends 1 to 1. In particular, this is a homomorphism of additive groups. So the results that you proved for groups apply here. In particular, recall that the kernel of a homomorphism is just the set of all elements that are mapped to 0. This is going to form a subgroup of the source ring under addition. And moreover, this map is injective if and only if the map phi is injective if and only if its kernel is 0, as you can check using subtraction. Okay. So last time I asked you to find out the kernel of a couple of important homomorphisms involving polynomial rings, which I have rewritten here. So if you have not done that, please stop and do it right now. First, I have to find the kernel of evaluation at a given element C. So this homomorphism takes in a polynomial f and evaluates it at C to get f of C. F will be in the kernel of this homomorphism precisely when C is a root of f. By the factor theorem, this will happen precisely when f is a multiple of x minus C. And therefore, the kernel of this evaluation at C homomorphism is the set of all multiples of x minus C that I have denoted in this fashion. We will soon call this the principal ideal generated by the polynomial x minus C. In the second example, I am given the evaluation homomorphism. This takes in a polynomial f and sends it to the function that it defines on R by means of evaluation. Okay, so a polynomial f is going to be in the kernel precisely when it evaluates to a 0 function. In other words, when every element C in the ground ring is a root of this polynomial. Okay, let us restrict to the case where the ground ring is an integral domain. In this case, we did an exercise at the end of last class where we said that a non-zero polynomial can have at most as many roots as the degree of that polynomial. Okay, so if f is going to have every element of R as a root, then the underlying domain cannot be infinite, because in this case no non-zero polynomial can have these infinitely many roots. So if the underlying ring is an infinite domain, then only the 0 polynomial evaluates to the 0 function. In other words, in this case, the evaluation map is an injective homomorphism. So we have proved a statement that we made last time, that any real polynomial can be uniquely recovered from the function that it defines. By the way, if I allow the ground ring to be an arbitrary infinite ring, then this statement is no longer true. And you should try to find a counterexample. Okay, moving on, let us now consider the case where R is a finite integral domain R. In this case, I can consider the product of all x minus c's, where c is ranging over the finitely many values in this integral domain. By the way, a finite integral domain is a field, but that fact is not really important here. Okay, so considering this product, notice that every element of R by construction is a root of this polynomial. Every element in R is also therefore a root of any multiple of this polynomial. Therefore, all multiples of this polynomial are going to be in the kernel of the evaluation map. Conversely, if f is in the kernel, then every x minus c is a factor of such f. Because the ground ring is an integral domain, the product of these x minus c's must also divide f. This is what we saw in the remark at the end of last time's exercise. Okay. So all in all, what we have seen is that in the case of underlying ring being a finite integral domain, the kernel of the evaluation map is the principal ideal generated by this product, which is a polynomial whose degree is as much as the cardinality of R. Okay. This example may also come in handy in finding the counter example that I asked you to find out over here, along with a construction, a simple construction that we will see in a couple of lectures. So see if you can anticipate that. After these examples, let's move back and consider kernels abstractly. So if phi is a homomorphism, then the first condition already implies that kernel of phi is a subgroup of R under addition, as we already saw. So now the next question is, do the remaining two conditions for a homomorphism have any implication on what kernel of phi can be? This is going to lead us to the definition of an ideal, so please think about this for a moment. Okay, so let us see the consequences of this second condition on the kernel of a homomorphism. What we are about to do is so general that I will allow the rings to be even non-commutative below this double line. First, the kernel of phi is obviously closed under multiplication, but something much more is true. If just one of A and B is in the kernel, then phi of AB is a product of two things, at least one of which is 0, and so the product is 0. In other words, if I take something in the kernel and multiply it by any element of R, whether from the right or from the left, the product is still in the kernel. In other words, the kernel absorbs multiplication by any element in the source ring. Okay, so property number 2 and property number 4, I want to abstract these out in a definition of something called an ideal. This is a funny word and it is there for historical reasons that we will see later on. Definition: a subset I of a ring R is called an ideal of R if it meets two conditions. One, it must be a subgroup of R, and second, it must absorb multiplication by an arbitrary element of R from the right as well as from the left. A couple of remarks here. One, in the non-commutative case, I can consider variations. Suppose a subset satisfies the first condition and just the first condition on the second line. Then I can call it a right ideal. Similarly, I have the notion of a left ideal. Of course, for a commutative ring, left, right, or two-sided, it's all the same. But for non-commutative rings, these one-sided ideals are also useful. Second remark, if I take R to be minus 1 in the second condition, then it shows that I is closed under taking negatives. Therefore, while checking that some given set is an ideal, it is enough for the first condition to say that it is closed under addition, because minuses are automatically taken care of by the second condition. This can come in a bit handy in examples. Alright, so as usual, like with any definition, we must see examples. If I take just the zero element of any ring, then by itself it is a group, and of course it absorbs multiplication by anything, so it is an ideal. It is the smallest ideal in any ring. Likewise, the entire ring also is an ideal of itself. So these two extreme examples are called the trivial ideals. We have also seen that the kernel of any homomorphism is an ideal of the source ring. It is also a proper ideal, meaning that it is a proper subset of the source ring because 1 is not in it, because phi of 1 is required to be 1, which cannot be 0, as we have stipulated. A small remark here: if I allowed the 0 ring and if I take S to be 0, then the kernel of this would be the entire ring R, and so I would not have this exception. Some people prefer this system, but then from time to time you have to say non-zero ring. Instead, what we will do is from time to time we will have to say proper ideal. And I will try to be careful with this, but sometimes I might forget. So please watch out. Alright, so let's leave this and go back to commutative rings. A very important example here of ideals is the principal ideal generated by a given element, A. By definition, this is just the set of all multiples of A. This is a group under addition because of distributivity, and it obviously absorbs multiplication from both sides because the ring is commutative. Alright, let's see some special cases of this. If I take A to be 1, then the principal ideal is of course the whole ring. A tiny extension of this: suppose I take a unit U and take the principal ideal generated by that. First, I get 1 in there as U inverse times U, and then multiplying that by an arbitrary element, I see that Ru is all of R. Okay. So by the way, notation for principal ideal generated by A is Ra or Ar, or A within parentheses if the underlying ring is understood. So finally, I want to give you two very important examples to work out. In the first one, I have asked you to find out all ideals in a field and to show that the answer actually characterizes a field. The second example is about two very important rings that we said are similar to each other: the ring of integers and Fx, where F is a field. So what you should show is that all ideals in these rings are principal ideals. So please do this right now. Okay, so let's see the solutions. Both are very important. First, I claim that a field has no ideals. Of course, this is sloppy talk, and sometimes I may say things like that, but what I mean is that a field has no non-trivial ideals. So let me take a non-zero ideal. I need to show that it must be the whole ring. So let's take something non-zero in it, call it A. I remember that this is a field and so A has an inverse, and since I is an ideal, it absorbs multiplication by arbitrary elements of R, in particular A inverse. Therefore, A inverse times A, which is 1, must be in the ideal. Now, multiplying 1 by arbitrary elements of R, I deduce that I must equal the entire ring. Conversely, let's take a ring that has no non-trivial ideals. I need to show that every non-zero element A must have an inverse. So how do I do that? I remember the principal ideal and I take the principal ideal generated by A. This contains A, so it is non-zero. So by hypothesis, it must be the entire ring R. In particular, I must have an element B such that A times B is equal to 1. So B is the required inverse of A. Moving on, now I have to show that every ideal of f of x is principal, and the same is true for z. For integers, I know that every subgroup itself is cyclic, so therefore there is nothing to prove. But still it is worthwhile to cast this proof in terms of ring theory. And here I have done this for f of x. So let's take an ideal. If it is 0, then it is generated by 0. So let's take a non-zero ideal. Now I need to find a magic element D that generates I. Where do I look for it? Well, I look at all the non-zero elements in I and I take D to be an element with the smallest possible degree. You can see that it works by using long division, and I have written the details here. But this is one proof that you must be able to do on your own. So please try to do that now. And as a check that you understand it, you can try to do these exercises. The proof for Z is exactly the same. You just replace degree by absolute value. The choice of generator D is not unique for a non-zero ideal because I can multiply D by any unit in the ring without changing the ideal. But you should check that this is the only ambiguity. Moreover, I can make D unique as follows. For Z, I multiply D by -1 if necessary to make it positive. For f of x, I divide D by its leading coefficient to make it monic. You should check that with these choices, D does become unique in either situation. Finally, all of homework 0 is possible for f of x. So, Euclidean algorithm to find the GCD, GCD as a linear combination, equivalence of two definitions of prime, essentially unique factorization into product of primes, and Chinese remainder theorem. The proof will stay exactly the same, essentially, as that you did for Z. So if you have some trouble, then that means that you need to revisit your proof for Z and maybe recast it. So please do that.